as I said before, so this whole course we put in the frame of the sustainable development and also the connected sustainable development goals, which have been adopted end of 2015 along with this 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And you see among these 17 SDGs there's a separate goal for climate. It's SDG number 13 called climate action. And under each goal you have a list also of different targets. And under this goal there's, for example, the target that there should be the adaptive capacity should be strengthened, or the resilience should be strengthened. And there's also the target that, for example, climate change measures should be integrated into national policies, into national planning. There's also the target, I think, that the countries who committed also to this agenda, that they actually should mobilize every year, I think, around $100 billion to address actually climate change issues, especially in developing countries. And there's also a lot about raising awareness about the issue of climate change. In general, when you look at the targets also, there's not really now, or you cannot really directly see, I would say, the connection also to sustainable development. So why actually should we care then about climate change when we talk about how to achieve also sustainable development? And when you also go on the homepage of this SDGs and go under climate action, you also see there's one sentence, I think, where it's written, there's no country in the world which does not experience firsthand the effects of climate change. And this is actually the crucial point, because maybe in general you would also say, especially in the Central Asian region, thinking about climate change, maybe also the people have other more urgent problems, how to find a job, or how to, even when you go to the rural areas, how to survive the next winter. So there are very urgent problems, and you might ask, so why actually the people should care? Or when you think about emitting greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, they're not big emitters of greenhouse gases in comparison, for example, to China. So you might say, okay, then they should do something about it, but why actually here, for example, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan? But, as I said, this sends also the drastic effects of climate change. The problem is, even though maybe Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan are not emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, or maybe not contributing a lot to climate change, but they experience, of course, the effects and the impacts. So this is why we should actually care. And looking a little bit at the trends and also effects of climate change in the region. First here is, you see a figure about changes in average temperature on a global level. And here you have, the baseline is 1986 to 2005, and the temperature is projected for 2081 to 2100. So a little bit far in the future. And you see actually projections for two different scenarios. And here you see the decreased greenhouse gas scenario and the business as usual scenario. And these two scenarios basically derived from the climate models were run, and they actually assume always how we actually continue to live, so to say also. And this is referred to how much greenhouse gases we will continue to emit into the atmosphere. And when it's written there's a decreased greenhouse gas scenario, it's a scenario where we assume, okay, we will focus more on maybe renewable energy, we will decrease the emissions of greenhouse gases. And when you look at a business as usual scenario, there's the assumption that we will continue to focus more on fossil fuels, to burn fossil fuels, to destroy our also our calm things like forests, like we also do a lot at the moment, so business as usual scenario. But actually for both scenarios, so the optimistic or the worst case scenario, you see that there is all over the world, maybe there are some spots, not, but all over the world we can see that there's an increase in temperature. I mean, of course, it's far ahead in the future, but when you really look into the future, there are really severe changes, because it's going here dark red, especially when we look also here in this area where Central Asia is located. So there will be a severe increase in temperature. I will also later break it down for only the Central Asian region, but so far more on the global level. For precipitation, it looks a little bit different. We have again also these two scenarios, but for precipitation it's really diverse. You cannot really say in general that there might be an increase in precipitation, there might be a decrease in precipitation. There will be regions where it will become wetter, for example, or there will be regions where it also becomes drier. So there's really, it's very diverse.
So this is precipitation of carbon dioxide.
Again?
Carbon dioxide, this is
No. Any rains or any water-based substance falling in the sky.
Yeah. And when we zoom in now to here the region of Central Asia, also even separated by countries, you see that also here, of course, the air temperature will increase. According, I think, to the last IPCC report, it was projected for this region, when we look, I think the time period was between 2046 and 2065, that there will be, for the optimistic scenario, will be an increase in temperature of 3 to 4 degrees, but more for the worst case, even 4 to 5 degrees increase in average. So all over the countries you see here this increase in temperature. The same picture also for the region regarding precipitation and snowfall. I mean, for Kazakhstan it's projected an increase, but for the other countries, again, could be an increase in precipitation, could be also a decrease in precipitation, and also, of course, depends very much also on the mountains, because you see, especially here also the mountainous countries, due to the mountain stretches, you have really this very region-specific conditions, so it's really hard sometimes to predict the changes in precipitation. But there are also extreme weather events and climate-related hazards, for example, like landslides or floods or mud flows or severe storms, also extreme precipitation events. So in a very short time, a lot of precipitation will also increase. And then when we look, for example, at melting ice and permafrost, so also we have a lot of glaciers here in the region, in the mountainous areas, and it's also more or less sure that these glaciers, the small to medium-sized glaciers, maybe even disappear in the future, and definitely these bigger glaciers, they also, the size are decreasing, and that's why there's an increase in melting ice and also permafrost. And this, of course, has then an effect on water resources availability in the future, because especially here, the mountainous areas, also like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, they are the water towers for the whole region. So the lowland areas, they are highly dependent, and of course also here, the mountainous countries itself, they are highly dependent also on the water availability. And due to actually this melting also of glaciers, there could be in the beginning an increase, of course, of water availability because more water is coming down. But due to, or in combination also with more extreme events, like droughts, for example, or very hot temperatures in summer, there's sometimes also this very abrupt melting. So then when you have this combination of very abrupt melting and the water is coming down, you often have that the water is coming down as mud flow, for example, or as flood. So even though there might be an increase in the beginning of water availability, it's water coming down which you cannot really use if you don't save it. But then in the long run, it's definitely a decrease, and also as for the water availability. So these were the trends, and then now I would like to focus a little bit what are actually then the impacts of climate change in Central Asia. So we saw in the table before that you have these climate-related hazards, so this extreme weather events. So, for example, the intensity and frequency of natural hazards, as I mentioned, such as floods, drought, landslides, heat waves, and avalanches will increase. This could lead then actually damage to human lives, damage to human settlements, infrastructure, and so on. Or when it also comes down with a lot of sediments, for example, then it also influence the energy supply, because a lot of energy is also generated with the help of hydropower, and this will influence this. And also then it will also increase the soil loss and soil erosion, which will then also reduce the soil productivity. The water situation I already mentioned. So in the long run there will be a decrease, also due to melting glaciers, permafrost, and snow cover, and this definitely will affect then, of course, the whole water availability in the region, and so less water availability also for irrigation, because the people here are highly dependent, of course, on irrigated agriculture and also on the hydropower. And for agricultural land and pasture land, they are highly sensitive to increasing temperatures, drought periods, and also reduced water availability. Here you just see a map of the region where they actually indicated, so to say, where are the hot spots of some of these impacts. So for example, it's very, of course, very broad. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, they pointed out as there's an increased risk of climate-related hazards in the mountains. Of course, we have, especially in the mountainous areas, also where the steep slopes are and the glaciers, you have this. There are more prone areas for mud flows, landslides, and floods. Here, more in the lower land, also where here I think is the Fergana Valley, also you have more this severe drought impacts, and also areas where you have glaciers and sea ice melting, but just to get also more geographical overview of the situation. Yes. And also regarding vocabulary, I talked a lot now about impacts also of climate change, especially in the region. And here actually I would like to highlight that often, because we talk a lot now about climate change, and also when we go, for example, in the region where we are working from our project, and then the people say, for example, last year my harvest was really bad. And then, because many people talk a lot about climate change, they immediately say it was because of climate change. But that's why I want to highlight a little bit more that it's important to really understand impacts, and we cannot, of course, now always say climate change caused an impact. There are very simple examples, for example, A causes B. So we could say, of course, earlier springs, maybe due to an increasing temperature, and there might be spring comes a little bit earlier. This, of course, causes trees to flower earlier than in the past. A causes B. And sometimes, I'm not sure if you remember actually this massive die-off of the Saiga antelope last was end of 2015 in Kazakhstan. And what I want to do now is I want to play a game, and in this game I would like to come up with a policy option we together develop to address climate change. And for this I hand out now the sheets of paper here. So everyone takes one sheet. And this piece of paper actually is now, it's a metaphor for a policy option. So a policy option to address the climate change issue. And I will give now instructions, and every step more or less is a policy step. How to come actually to this policy option. And the overall goal in the end is that we all produce, everyone. So the overall goal is that we, in the end, everyone has an identical pattern of this piece of paper. And I will start now to give instructions, and you're not allowed to ask questions. You just have to follow my instructions. And there are actually 3 steps. And the first step is that you fold the paper in half. And tear off the upper right corner. What is difficult? The second step is you fold the paper in half again, and you tear off the bottom right corner. And the third step is that you fold the paper again, and tear off the bottom left corner. And now, show me what you have. I have this pattern here. It's not important now how, like, the size of the torn holes, for example. It's only there are this kind of patterns. I see also some of you have, and a lot of people also have that there's this torn hole inside. So more or less ambiguous vocabulary, because when I said okay, bottom right corner, then of course for me bottom right is here, but for you maybe then it's the other side and so on. So this is one thing. Another thing. I also said at the beginning, you're not allowed to ask questions. I just give you instructions. So there's also this one-way communication, because you could have also said this, how should I do it? And I also, in the beginning, said, okay, we would like to have an identical pattern, everyone, but you were not aware actually how the pattern should look like. So maybe I should have also showed you from the beginning how I would like to have this pattern. And I would like to have it maybe this way and not the hole in the inside. Okay, actually I played this game because it showed actually that sometimes or to communicate very simple ideas often fail. And I thought actually that when I give you instructions and I have this idea in my head how actually the outcome should look like in the end, and I thought I'd do an eloquent job and give you the instruction that you are able actually also to follow and come up with this same idea. Which is, of course, an assumption, and especially also what's your name again? What you said with the... Emma. What Emma said also with this ambiguous vocabulary is often also the case when people talk about climate change. Because also when I started this lecture today, I used a lot of words, like impacts of climate change, or even climate change itself. Then also anyone said there's increasing variability. So there are a lot of vocabulary used in the context of climate change issues. But I can assure you that in any group of people also have a different understanding or perception of the terms used in the context of climate change. And also when we start actually our project with GRZ about climate change adaptation, I mean in our group basically all people, they studied environmental related programs, or they talk a lot about climate change, but what we did actually also in this project was in the beginning to have a workshop where we clarified among our group what do we actually mean when we talk about different climate change terms. That's why I would like to do now also to clarify again some of these terms I used, and we will also use them more in the run of these lectures and seminars, just to bring all of us here on the same level of understanding when we talk about these issues. Of course, for some, it will be a repetition, but I always quote in a colleague of mine who always says you have to hear things 14 times in order to keep them in mind. And I would like to start really basic and just to highlight once more what is actually the difference between weather and climate. And for some of you it might be now very easy, because here you see two figures, and I would like to know which one of this figure presents climate and which one presents weather. I see. The lower one represents weather and the upper one climate, just by seeing also the scale. Because the upper one years, so really long term, and the lower one you see the daily fluctuations. Because really weather represents daily fluctuations in temperature, precipitation, wind speed, cloud cover, etc. Also other environmental parameters. But why is it actually important to highlight this is, of course, in these daily fluctuations you also have sometimes these weather extremes. So I think we also just talked about it, that this year it's really cold still. But there's still a very cold day in March. Last year it was already really warm. The same day. Yeah. And often people, when there's like a really cold day, for example, they say there's no global warming. Normally it should be much warmer already now, but today is really cold, so there probably is no global warming. But you cannot say this because it is only a weather extreme event. It's a single data point. Yeah. So it does not prove or disprove a trend into a certain direction. Because, as you also said, that of course climate is, you can consider it as the average weather over a very long period of time. So 30 years. Often they take. And here you see also that, of course, you have this fluctuation. Right? You can have a very dry year, or you can have a very wet year if you take this now as precipitation, for example. So this is why you also have these fluctuations, but you see that you have this average line here. So even though you have this fluctuation, it still moves within this range. And this brings me now also to the second pair of terms I would like to highlight is climate variability versus climate change. Because as I said, when we think about year to year, we have these variations. Yeah? Also this year, there's a lot of snow. Last year was much less snow. But it could be that it still moves also within this normal variability, but in the long run, it keeps more or less this average. So really, climate variability is the way climate fluctuates yearly above and below a long-term average. Climate change now is when you have these fluctuations along the long-term average, but then you see long-term changes in weather averages and extremes, and you see that it goes into a certain direction over this longer period of time. And what you also may realize from this graph here is that you have this variability, these fluctuations, but when it goes into a different direction, also these fluctuations, so also these extremes, it's changing. And normally we realize also climate change that these extremes are also increasing. Is this clear so far?
Yes.
And then the last term I want to highlight is global warming. Because global warming really refers only to the rise in global average temperatures due to increasing greenhouse gas in the atmosphere caused by human activity. So you could say that global warming only describes one symptom of the effects of climate change. Yeah, just a short review. I mean, this is all the definitions I just gave. And now I would like to do shortly a quiz. The Earth's average annual temperature has increased by nearly 1 degree over the past century. Okay, without question. This region typically experiences mild, moderately wet winters and warm, dry summers.
Was that a why or a climate? Why? So why is that describing climate?
It's kind of description of.
Yeah. It's a description of the normal status. That's why it's climate and not anything else.
And the last one's really difficult.
Yes.
A strong El Nino event causes warm and very wet weather in parts of this region, resulting in severe flooding. But why?
They started to flower, and after that, like 1 week later or 2 weeks, I don't remember, in April, it was a sudden snow in April, and all our flower trees, they were frozen. So those were the apricot and apple trees. And as you can guess, after that, we didn't get much enough harvest of that. And maybe it didn't really affect our family because we don't sell those fruits. But in that year, I remember that in use, there was that other farmers, they really suffered from that event. They couldn't get enough income from sales of those products.
Same understanding of different terms we are using in the context of climate change, because we cannot agree if we cannot communicate and speak the same language. And then, as we mentioned now a lot of times also, that sometimes extreme weather events are often incorrectly used to support or deny the existence of climate change. So we have to be careful there. And because of the complexity of interactions, it is not correct to say that climate change or only this effect of climate change causes an impact. And climate change is happening, and it really affects all sectors, and is therefore a key aspect to consider when trying to achieve sustainable development. These are some key messages to take home with. Of course, 75 minutes is always very short, and there will be definitely also additional material to read, and also other information we will provide you. And of course, in the seminar, we will continue, of course, to talk more about other issues, as I mentioned before: vulnerability, adaptation, risk mitigation, and so on. So, if there's no urgent question or a need to discuss something today, I would like to close.